First, I'd like to say thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here. I always get energized coming to spend a day like this with other Agile like-minded people, and it inspires me to go back and fight the good fight in big corporate America that maybe isn't as enlightened as those of us in here today. So I'm Director of Software Delivery for Avea.com and mobile web, which basically means I own delivery from the product owner defining it till we hand it over to our operations team. So all aspects of the software development lifecycle. Whoa. Okay. So since you guys are probably less familiar with Avea.com, I'll just kind of give you a brief history. Basically, it's served many masters over the years, so it's evolved from being just a static website to transactions to generating revenue, and then now we're trying to get into interactions and really that customer brand that Tony spoke about earlier, because we feel like that's our one site where we can maintain that customer brand and control the voice that we have with customers. And the other thing I would sort of overlay with this is that the current code base has been in existence since 2001. It's been on 3 different platforms, but it's basically that same code base. So that becomes relevant into our Agile journey as we talk through that. Are we having issues with the mic? Is that better? Now, I know this is my vanity metric slide based on what Tony said this morning, but I think the main message here is that we have about 25 million unique visitors a month. This was pre-merger, so that's gone up substantially now. And we have 1 revenue booking per second. So Avea.com is viewed as the lowest cost channel to book revenue. So while they give us a lot of autonomy and we can experiment and do things, they all still are, we have to kind of do in the lines like Tony said. So we have to make sure that we don't put too much at jeopardy while we do those experiments. So this is really where we all began. And this was probably in about 2006-ish time frame. At that point, we were a program that was constrained to 5 to 7 teams. And of course, that we could never deliver enough of what our business partners wanted. So that created a lot of dysfunction with stakeholders. They would, have the food fight or who was going to get the next team that became available. And then once they got hold of a team, they wouldn't let go. So we would spend, 80% of the project working on the last 20% of the requirements where we didn't really get a lot of value. So there was just a lot of dysfunction in the entire organization. And it was just really, we had hit a breaking point. We were trying, it was post 9/11, so we were trying to avoid bankruptcy. The web was taking off, mobile was starting to hit. So we really had hit constraints where we needed to do something drastic. The other issue we had along with this is our quality was horrendous. Like, I'm embarrassed to kind of talk about it, but it was just something we didn't think about. It was an afterthought. We would negotiate, we would rationalize, I guess, with ourselves that defects weren't really that bad. And we had the whole defect hierarchy of launch critical, high, medium, low. And so it was kind of, we were in a bad place all around. We couldn't deliver fast enough. We couldn't deliver consistency. What we did deliver was of really poor quality. And then we also had matrix resources. So our people weren't that happy either because the good ones had performance punishment. So we would just yank them around to the most important project to help kind of get it over the finish line. And it just wasn't really a good place to work, I'll be honest. So we've done a lot. Agile has helped with our culture transformation as well. So the previous slide, if you really think about it, all that was waterfall project pain. I think all of you can probably relate to that in some regard. And so what happened for us is really one project team. I happen to be on that team as an architect. We just decided we're getting a room in the basement. We're going to just do this Agile thing because we're really frustrated with the way things are going right now. And ironically, we did that on an infrastructure project where we re-platformed our code from ATG Dynamo Personalization Server to WebSphere. And then we also, at the same time of re-platforming, we built out another disaster recovery site. So we had both, software development to manage as well as infrastructure, and our infrastructure is a third-party managed service provider. So we didn't have direct control over that, but we were able to do that entire project in an agile way. And so what happened with that is senior executives as well as other people in the organization started to take notice because they sensed that there was something different in the way that that project was done. It was more successful, it was on time, under budget, all the things that you don't expect, in a platform rewrite and, not rewrite, but a re-platform and building out an infrastructure. So when that happened, then pretty much everyone got on board. And so it became just this wild, wild west adoption. So every team started kind of doing some form of Agile. They didn't know what it was. And it was really just crazy inconsistent. We couldn't report to senior executives. They were like, what are you guys doing? We walk through the halls. We see all these people standing up in the morning. They're carrying these little boards around. And it really, I won't say it wasn't successful because we learned a lot from it, but it just wasn't maintainable, and it still wasn't helping us really scale the organization. So it was something where we had to say, okay, we have to get more consistency in the adoption. What are we going to do? So our answer to that was to bring in external Agile coaches. That really was a key to our success. I call it the honeymoon of objectivity. So as a consultant, they can come in and just point out the really small things that look totally normal, kind of the things that you've done that way because you've always been doing them. And so that really helped in our Agile adoption, figure out where we needed to focus first. Like what's the one thing we can do that will drive the most value for the organization next? Because I think a lot of times when you do Agile adoptions, you start trying to do all of it at once and you do all of it really poorly. But if you focus on that one thing, then you get really good at that, people get confidence, and then you can start to build on that. So the next thing to solve was we had, more consistency in Agile, but we still had the issue with matrix resources. So if projects got in trouble, we would still pull people off, or we would kind of dynamically form teams around projects every time that a new project came. So we still had a lot of that performance punishment going on, and then we had a lot of, it hindered our predictability, because you can't predict what this team is going to do if you're constantly changing the dynamics of the team. Even if you move one person off, the team kind of has to go through the storming, norming, performing again. So this was one of the biggest battles to fight in our organization, and it's still one that we have to defend to today, but holding the team sacred. I think on paper, everyone thinks, well, we're not using that person at 100% utilization if they're only dedicated to one Agile team. But it's really been the key to getting teams that are high-performing. A team cannot become high-performing if you're constantly changing the members on that team. And it really helped teams, get an established velocity and then start to focus on higher levels of Agile adoption from a team perspective, which also then allows us to get a higher level of Agile maturity and adoption from an organization perspective. So the next issue we faced, we were doing really well from an IT perspective, but as some of you probably faced, you can only go so far in your Agile adoption without bringing the business along with you. Oops. Wow, this is really sensitive. I hate build-out slides. So luckily for us, and this was really, I think in any somewhat success story, you have to have some serendipitous luck that just helps you take it to the next level. So about the time we were hitting the breaking point with we're really good at Agile, we're doing, incremental releases, or we were prepared to do incremental releases, the issue became the business still was not comfortable with that. They still wanted to wait until the entire project was done to release to customers. So the thing that helped at this point is that we rolled out Agile at American at the enterprise level. And when we did that, it came with all sets of training for the business. And while I don't endorse this approach, it did work for us. Our CIO at the time, because budget still lied in the IT organization, he required that the business come with us for the funding, they had to be there and be part of it, and that he would only release funding for 3 months at a time. So we started to get the business to think about what can we do in 3 months so we can go ask for funding one time and release something to production. This also helped with helping the business understand what we were talking about from an Agile perspective, because they have access to all the same training that now my teams had been doing for years. And so that really helped elevate the level of the organization as a whole. So the next one's a big one. This is the one that's near and dear to my heart, and that is, I think if you go on your Agile journey without a focus to technical excellence, you can amass technical debt at record speeds to the point that you may not be able to recover from it. That's definitely, as I talked about before, that was the path that we were on. You know, and I try to think of, I have so many examples of the anti-pattern of technical excellence, but I think my one favorite is that we had an init method in one class. The init method was over 3,000 lines. So number one, it's supposed to be an init method. And then all it did was add one item to the shopping cart. So every time, and at this time we were trying to, as you guys know, Airlines trying to sell all these ancillary products. So we were trying to add all these products to the website to sell, and the business just couldn't understand, like, why does it take you so long to add one product? Just put it in the shopping cart and fulfill it. And so one of the teams was courageous enough to me to print that init method out and roll it out across the room and show me, like, this is what we're facing when we try to, you know, add another product to the code. So that's one example of the years of technical debt that we had amassed in our code base. I think it's just something that naturally happens when you have a 13-year-old code base. And then we had gone through different models. So we've gone through, you know, we've offshored, I think, on every continent. We tried to do all internal employees, then we did external contractors. And so with all those different approaches, just different, we didn't control the code base. We didn't help people. We didn't set them up for success, right? We just brought them in and we said, we want you to deliver this project. And that pretty much, if you're not intentional about the way you want it to be, that ends up in a delivery at all cost situation, right? So for us, technical excellence was the game changer. We really had, it was kind of like this ongoing fight we had every 2 years. We wanted to rewrite the entire code base. And we'd try to do a project, and it'd be, you know, multi-millions of dollars to rewrite, and it would never be successful because at the time that we were rewriting, there would be all these teams making changes. So the rewrite team, the little ivory tower rewrite team, couldn't keep up with the rate of change. So a turning point for us was just saying, like, hey, listen, we have a 13-year-old code base. It does a lot of great things. Let's just stop fighting it. Let's embrace it for what it is, and then try to improve upon it where it is. And that really was a change for us because it was kind of like it gave everyone permission to just go like, okay, we're naming it that it sucks. We all know that. And now what are each one of us going to do to make it better? And it really was around software craftsmanship. So it became, how you build something is just as important as what you're building. Where previously for years in the organization, it was all about just deliver it as fast as you can, take any shortcuts. We don't care about technical debt. We had a managing director at one point that threatened to fire us if we said the word refactor. You know, and you have to think, I think we talked about it earlier, the context of the company was we're trying to avoid bankruptcy and control our own destiny. So all those decisions, no one had bad intent, but you know, if you're not intentional, this is kind of the side effect of what happens. So the other thing we did, which I think was kind of how we took technical excellence to the next level, previous to the technical excellence coach, we had TDD was a mandate and all these great software development practices, but people just still weren't doing it. And so it's kind of a personal thing with me. I didn't want to I feel like if you try to force people and you try to measure the wrong things, then you don't get what you're ultimately trying to get, right? So we had that where unit tests, we talked about measuring coverage, and then people just wrote all these really great, you know, getter, setter, unit tests. Which didn't improve the code functionality. So one of the things we did was hire a technical excellence coach, and he's amazing. He has the patience of a saint, and because he tells me things, and I'm like, please don't tell me their name or we will have to fire that person. But he's very good at meeting people where they are. And so that's why we call them coach. Like, we need someone to give people game time coaching in that moment in the game. Like, it's really easy in practice in this perfect little, controlled environment to say, here's how you do TDD. But when they get into a code base that has a 3,000 line init method, it's a little difficult, right? It's like, okay, where do I start? So having him sort of meet people in the code base every day, and that's his full-time job, just to be available, it was probably one of the biggest game changers for us as an organization. He's still there. I can't foresee him, his job being done anytime soon. But that was a big game changer. And it was also Michael Feather's book, which we've had Michael Feathers come talk to my organization. Pretty much it was the Bible for AA.com. You would hear people quoting scriptures from it in the hall. And if you said, I can't refactor this part of code because of XYZ, someone would say, well, go look at chapter 7 in Feather's book, because he pretty much tells you how to do that. And it was kind of like, okay, so that became the changing point between the Feathers book and then our technical excellence coach being there to reinforce all those principles on a daily basis. Those really became kind of instrumental, pivotal times for our organization. The other thing became building quality in as you go. Like, before, we had these, I call them release theatrics. At the end, we would decide, like, is it ready to go? Is it not ready to go? Should we push the date? Should we pull that functionality out? And so we really had to focus on building quality in as you go, because otherwise you're not doing Agile, right? Because you should be able to ship that product at any given point in time. Well, ours was, we would get to the point where the business would say, okay, ship it, and we'd say, okay, we need a couple iterations to really get it shippable, which is really asking them to pay debt that they shouldn't have to pay, right? So that focusing on building the quality in the front was a big changer too, and that really went hand in hand with the TDD and some of the other practices that we brought in from Feather's book and with our excellence coach. The other thing, and this has been kind of controversial in our organization, although it's not anymore. So our organization is made up of 75 contractors and 25% employees. And so, we would go through these phases where, I was thinking of Neil's or his presentation. The people on the top, the thinkers, like the really high thinkers, would say, well, Misty, just, they're contractors, so just cut them and go hire new people with these skills that you want. But I always had consternation about that, because they had all this domain experience and they understood our domain as an airline and an e-commerce site. And so it felt like it was a lot of wasted, talent and time. So eventually I won the argument to run an experiment on, let us build in training. Now that we have a technical excellence coach, we would do training with him and we would include our contractors. So I really do, some people argue with that, but we do invest in our contractors. I feel like they're making a commitment to our organization, so we can make that a bilateral and show them commitment back. And so we constantly, I think we had a TDD class last week. We have TDD classes, object-oriented programming design. Our coach has code clinics 2 or 3 times a week. We have another kind of self-organizing, I think you maybe talked about that, like where peer groups gets together. It's called Code Ninjas, because they all want to be ninjas. Where they share, this is some area that I refactored, here's a success I had, or tricky code base alone. The last piece is, I firmly believed, and I had to go to my CIO and pretty much commit to this at one point, that we could do more with less. So kind of, if you overlaid this, we grew from 5 to 25 teams during this time, and we didn't grow like in our throughput, so we weren't delivering that much more. So it really became, if I can get the right people on the bus, we can deliver quality software with quality built in, so I really can do more with less. And it was one of those where it was kind of a career moment where you had to go to the CIO, and I had to commit to that. And I'm happy to say that we've been able to successfully show that we've accomplished that and it probably took 2 years. To kind of see hard numbers where we actually delivered more, but had less teams for that year. Oops. So the other one we had was Delivery at all cost was also quality, right? And we talked about that. So the developers didn't build quality in, and then it would become this big theatrical thing at the end where we're, do we release it? I would have to trade my firstborn child with the ops manager to let this release go when we promise we'll fix it in the next iteration. We debated whether defects were launch critical or high or medium. I mean, it's just really this culture of dysfunction. And so I came up with this really radical idea that we would have a zero defect policy. And I cannot tell you how many people were in my office screaming and crying about this, because it sounds really radical if you are looking at it in terms of a waterfall development organization, because you would be, spending all this time at the end fixing defects. But my argument to that is, why should an Agile story, why should the story ever be accepted if there's a defect? So if you just don't accept the story and make sure you fix that defect, then you're naturally building quality in, and this is just a side effect. And so there were times in the first 6 months where my teams challenged me and called my bluff, and I had to go to the business and say, we're pushing the release because I'm not going to allow them to go into our pre-production environment with defects. And it was kind of rough in the beginning, but now this is something we don't even talk about anymore. It's just built into the way we do work. Everyone's, it's just natural, second nature. And that's probably been about 2 years, and that's been a drastic improvement, not only in the code base, but just in the culture. People are much more proud of the product that they deliver than they were before. So another side effect of this really became how you hire and who you hire. We were still hiring, command and control project managers that wanted to work the plan, and we were hiring them into Scrum Master role. In fact, our Scrum Master job description pretty much sounded like a PM job description. So one of the things we struggled with, there were people in the organization that we'd hired recently, and they just weren't successful. And so we could have easily looked at that and said, well, those people just sucked, and somehow they got through the interview process, and it happens. But instead, we tried to look at what we were doing to say, what should we change in our interview process? What are we really, how are we missing? How are these people getting through the cracks? So we changed that. That led to changing our job description. It makes a big difference when you talk about servant leadership and, Scrum Master qualities versus PM qualities in the historical world. The other area that we had to change was our technical development leads. So we have tech leads on every project, and previously I would say that we embraced sort of talented and toxic or rock stars, and then we became dependent on them. We're like, he can never leave. Don't let him buy lottery tickets or go on vacation. But that just drove other people in the organization just underperformed, because they're like, well, whatever. He's either going to take all the credit or they're going to default to him, so why do I care? So we had to do some radical things where we let some of those talented and toxic rock stars go. And that was probably one of the biggest moves that gave me and my leadership team credibility within the organization, because they said, God, we thought you didn't see it this whole time, that he was just taking advantage or whatever. And so that kind of opened our eyes to, wait, and again, it's a leadership position within the Scrum team, and we're not hiring for what we really value. So when we started looking at the things we value, we have this new saying where we say, a tech lead in our organization, we don't want just the best Java developer out there. We want a developer that is willing to develop developers. So they're measured on how they mentor, how are they helping other people grow, just different, where before they were probably measured on, the number of features that they got crammed out during the month or whatever. So that was a big thing for us, is just really hiring differently and changing the way you talk about roles, how you define the roles. And it's so funny. I think I even played devil's advocate one day. I was like, who cares what the title is? But it was amazing the difference. Even the people that were already there, when we started calling them Scrum Masters versus project managers, just everything about the way they function changed. So it does matter. It is the little things that people pay attention to. And so don't kind of overlook those, because I think it's easy to kind of downplay those, which I was guilty of at some points. So then we were functioning really well as an organization. We were pretty good in Agile. Technical excellence was getting to where it needed to be. And then we sort of realized that everyone was great, but they were all great in different ways. And for a large organization within a big bureaucracy, like, you need to be able to consistently report to your stakeholders, your CIO, how are we going to measure that we were doing more with less, some of those key things. So and we didn't always call these communities of practice. We used to call them disciplines. And so one of the things we did is created self-organizing communities of practice. So we have Scrum Masters, and they have a self-organizing community. And it's really to do that sharing across. So we do things consistently for our organization. And then we also have a safe place for them to go talk about failures or things that they want to try or struggles that they're having. So we have a Scrum Master, a BA QA community of practice, a Technical Excellence community of practice, and an Agile community of practice. And we usually serve pizza. I think you said that earlier, Tony, because people do attend more if you give them pizza. And we try to mix it up between someone coming to do the Sage on the Stage lecture like this, do a workshop. Like, a lot of times if our Scrum Masters go to an Agile conference, they'll learn new techniques for retrospectives or planning, and then they'll come back and we'll do that in a workshop type environment, kind of have our own little mini Agile conference. So that's been a big breakthrough for us, because I think one of the things we did with the organization is we changed the way we were structured from the QA discipline reports to the QA manager and the devs report to the dev manager. Now we are organized like a delivery organization around highly functioning Agile teams, and they're held sacred. But one of the things is that people started to lose that identity with maybe what they were passionate about to begin with. So now that they have their QA community of practice, they feel they're not as uncomfortable that they've lost that identity. So that was one of those little small intangible things that you think wouldn't matter a lot, but it had profound impact once we put it in place. And this is kind of where we are now. That's why it's light green versus dark green. So, now we have high-performing teams. They're doing things consistently across practices. Our technical excellence has improved drastically. But now what we're getting to is we still have a lot of manual testing, and it's just historically the way the organization was built up. And we get about 5 or 6 iterations into a project, and we're spending 50% of the iteration manually regression testing the previous 5 or 6 iterations. So to a dev manager like me, I think, oh my gosh, I'm getting 50% of the throughput of my developers and my what I'm able to deliver to our business counterparts. So now we're really, bringing the focus to, we need to build automation in, just like we build quality in. And so getting that regression testing that we build on as we go. And it's funny, now I can go to demos and product owners are talking about the value of fitness and behavior-driven development and those integration tests. So it's good because even the business is able to see the value, which means it's not an uphill battle. It didn't become like just this IT thing of, oh gosh, now they're doing one more thing over there that they want us to be on board with. So what are my key takeaways for you? The main thing is you have to approach your Agile journey in an Agile manner. I know there's frameworks or different things, but there really is no one size fits all. It has to do with the context, the environment you're in, what your organization is facing, what are the things you need to solve. There's like I think if you have a younger code base and you have automation built in, then you wouldn't have some of the issues that we had. So it's really about kind of embracing where you are as an organization and figure out what's the next most important thing that you need to solve. and it is embracing those obstacles, right? So we talk about Agile teams need to remove impediments. If you look at your Agile journey as just removing impediments to your organization's journey, any one of those obstacles on the previous slide could have been a reason for us to say, Agile's not right for this organization, Scrum sucks, let's not do it. But what we found is when we really focused there and solved it for the organization, like one that built trust, camaraderie, and then our level of enlightenment, we all kind of grew together at the same time by focusing on one thing in one area. And not viewing those as negatives. Like you need obstacles, that's the only way you're going to improve. I think a lot of people think obstacles are just a sign that you shouldn't go. Obviously, value does not get added overnight. There were many tenuous conversations around, what's this technical excellence thing? Why is it taking longer for people to deliver me features and stuff like that? But if you just hold true to the values that you're trying to, hold dear and communicate with your business stakeholders, help them understand how ultimately this is going to benefit them, and just stay true to it, like you will ultimately see the light. But you really do have to be an Agile warrior, because it's not just this light switch that you turn it on and everyone's, singing Kumbaya the next day and super happy about it. So you really do have to have resiliency to kind of keep going. But then that's a slippery slope. You can't be blind to the things these obstacles that people are bringing up to you. You have to embrace those, because if you try to turn a blind eye to the obstacles your team is bringing to you, and you kind of don't bring the business along for the journey, then you're pretty much setting yourself up for success. But if you look at, okay, I'm going to make sure I'm meeting business needs, helping them understand how this is going to benefit them, and then I'm also constantly looking to remove the impediments from my organization, then you all end up sort of in that place of enlightenment together. And we talked about this, like you can only get to a certain level of maturity with just the IT side, but you will never get to like those higher levels of Agile maturity without bringing the business along. If they don't want to do incremental releases, if they don't want to attend demos, they don't want to participate, then you're really just doing iterative development. But you have to meet them where they are. You can't just say, I'm just dragging you here to my IT world. So we tried to change meetings. Like we don't call it demo, we call it, what do you call it, like sprint review. We have different names, and we kind of see what resonates with the business and make it part of the value that they see from it. And so don't become a zealot, I guess is my warning, my caution. You have to figure out how to make it work for your organization and what's going to resonate with everyone. Trust, yeah, this is a big one. I think we've talked about it in Tony's. We have a saying, fail fast to avoid catastrophic failure. And so we really have tried to, just like he said, we've sent the emails saying embrace failure, it's safe to fail.